Welcome or welcome back to Studio Bilby. I'm Gemma, and today's video is all about the reasons I started sewing all my own clothes and how you can too, if you want. I've been sewing for over 15 years now. I wasn't able to find any really early pictures of me sewing, but here are some ones of me in high school with things that I made. But it was really in the last 12 months or so that I challenged myself to make all of my clothes instead of buying them. The thing is, I feel really guilty about supporting fast fashion, but I still want to feel cute and trendy, and I just don't have the funds to go out and buy all of my clothes from sustainable and high-end brands. So I decided I would start making almost all of my clothes in the most sustainable way that I could. So here are the 5 main reasons that I make my own clothes. Reason number 1, it's more sustainable and ethical. So obviously when you're making your own clothes instead of buying them, you're not supporting fast fashion. This is especially true if you're getting your fabric and materials secondhand or from sustainable sources. So I've got a few stats about fast fashion that you've probably all heard, but they shock me every time I hear them. So fashion production accounts for about 10% of all global emissions. Only 10% of all fashion brands worldwide pay their workers a living wage. And every second, the equivalent of a rubbish truckload of clothes is either burnt or put into landfill. Be patient with yourself because it is a really hard transition to make. It's so prevalent in our everyday lives, so it's not something that you could just switch off that easily. It's something that I've been working on for years, and I've only just managed to get to the point where I'm hardly consuming any fast fashion at all, and I would love to get to the point where I am consuming absolutely zero. So we're working on that. Even if you aim to just reduce your consumption of fast fashion just a little, it will make all the difference. Reason number 2, affordability. Sewing your own clothes can either be really expensive or really cheap, depending on what you do. It's definitely cheaper than buying the sustainable, ethical equivalent, and oftentimes it's going to be a lot better quality and longer lasting than just buying a fast fashion garment. So in the scheme of things, even if it's not the cheapest thing ever, you're probably going to get a lot more use out of it and it's going to last you longer. So it ends up being cheaper in the long run. I wouldn't say it's super cheap to set up from the beginning because there is quite a lot of equipment that goes into it, like you need a sewing machine and whatnot. But if you don't have all the equipment yourself, there are plenty of places that do open studios that have the equipment. Like I know that the last place that I was living in Footscray had an amazing little studio called the Handmakers Factory, and they did open studios where you could pay a certain amount and you would just be able to go in for a few hours, and they had sewing machines and all the equipment you could possibly need. So I'm sure that wherever you are, just look up open studio and you'd be able to find something like that near you. But once you have all the equipment, once you've got all that sorted, it's actually fairly affordable, especially if you're buying secondhand fabrics or repurposing old fabrics and materials that you already have lying around. Reason number 3, it's a great creative outlet. So you may or may not already know this, but I work full-time as a graphic designer, and I used to spend a lot of my free time doing freelance graphic design on the side on top of my already full-time job. But I started to get really burnt out about 2 years ago, and I still wanted a way to spend all my free time doing something creatively fulfilling because that's just how I roll. I always need to be doing something with my hands. I always need to be making. So I started doing more and more offline creative activities like pottery and sewing. It's such a great pastime, especially when, as a lot of you would for your day-to-day activities, you're staring at a screen all day. And I was just at work, I'm staring at a screen 90% of the time. And I come home, I just don't want to look at a screen anymore. So coming home and sewing is a great way to switch off, and no matter what I'm doing, I always feel more fulfilled and satisfied when I am making something. This point also leads quite nicely into reason number 4, which is it's good for your mental health. So obviously, especially when you're starting out and learning to sew, but even when you're an advanced sewer, you're always learning new skills. And learning new skills is so great for your mental health and well-being. It keeps you busy and keeps you offline, mostly. It helps you really slow down and connect to the project that you're doing. It's a great mindfulness activity. It really grounds you. And obviously you have to be in the present moment to be focusing on what you're working on. Reason number 5 is that when you make your own clothes, they are tailored to fit you specifically. So the standard sizes that we find in the shops are pretty limiting and oftentimes not very inclusive. When you're making your own clothes, you're literally tailoring them specific to you and your unique body shape. That way, they are more flattering and less restrictive than off-the-rack clothing. So those are the reasons why I choose to make my own clothes. Now let's get into how you can actually start making your own clothes if you don't really know where to begin. So number 1 is getting motivated. I find that the biggest struggle that I deal with is finding the motivation to actually make my clothes instead of just going and buying them. It's so much more effort, obviously, to make your own clothes rather than just buying them. And I feel like sometimes you need to hype yourself up to get into the spirit. Something that really helped with this for me was starting a Pinterest board of clothes that I saw that inspired me to make my own versions. Maybe there's stuff that you wouldn't necessarily be able to afford, or styles that are a bit more unique that you wouldn't necessarily find in all the shops. So I started gathering pictures of clothes like that, and then I would save them all to a Pinterest board, and then I could just go and source patterns based off of those. So it gives you a bit more of a tangible starting point because you can just literally look through your Pinterest board, find something that inspires you, and then literally just type in what you see, find a pattern, and go from there. The second step in where to start is, how do you get patterns? When I was younger and just starting out, we used to get patterns by going to the craft store, and they would have these big books of patterns that you look through, you find something that you like, and find the corresponding pattern in store. And they were physical patterns in little envelopes, and you buy them and you take them home and you cut them up and you start sewing. Now that is still something you can do, and it's quite nostalgic, so it's something that I enjoy doing from time to time. But a lot of the time, it's time consuming and limited to whatever stock they have in the store. So a more accessible way that gives you plenty of options these days is you can literally just find patterns on the internet that you can download yourself and print out at home. This gives you so many options at your fingertips, and they're usually a bit more trendy and current than the ones that you would find in Simplicity magazine and Birch and all those classic pattern books. So here are a few great places to find patterns online, and by the way, none of these are sponsored. This is just based on my personal experience over the years and what I've liked. Mood Society is a website that has a massive collection of patterns, and they are all free, which is, it blows my mind every time I look at it, honestly. So Mood Society has a massive collection of free patterns which range from beginner friendly to more advanced options. I would highly recommend just taking an hour or so to scroll through and take some time to look through all the patterns, and you can download them and save them for later because there is just so much content on that website. It's mind-boggling. Another great option for patterns is Peppermint Magazine. Peppermint Magazine has a bunch of cute sewing patterns on their website, and they are pay what you feel. So obviously if you can, it's nice to pay a little something since a lot of effort goes into making them available to everybody, but technically you could get them for free. Potentially my favorite option for getting patterns in terms of quality and the options available is Etsy. So these are paid patterns, but you can get some really affordable ones. They usually tend to be around the $5 USD mark, which, considering you can use them again and again, is pretty good and great cost per use. Another great resource that I love, which is a bit on the higher end of prices, but from what I've experienced, great quality, so you get what you pay for, is Style Arc. They have such a large pattern database and a lot of really current trends as well as some classic staples. So there's really something for everyone. Considering it costs a little bit more than a lot of the other places where you can get patterns, I'd recommend using them for more basic staple pieces since you would probably be getting a lot of use out of them and using those patterns again and again. Lastly, and this is a bit of a shameless plug, is Studio Build Me, aka my website. I've made a few free sewing patterns for beginner to intermediate sewers, and I imagine that I'm just going to keep adding to this as time goes on. I'll of course link all of these options in the description, but there are so many more out there, and a lot of the time if I'm looking for something specific, I'll literally just Google garment name and sewing pattern, and then just scrolling through to find exactly what I want. 3. Where to get started sourcing materials and fabrics. So out of convenience, I get a lot of my materials and fabrics from Spotlight and Lincraft, which for those of you who don't know are two of Australia's biggest craft chains. Probably not the most sustainable option, but they do have quite a lot of stock and tend to be relatively affordable. Another great option is Etsy. This is where you might source more unique styles or specific types of fabric. They have a lot of options out there. One of my absolute favourite fabric stores is actually called The Fabric Store, which, as far as I'm aware, there's a few of them around Australia and New Zealand, but where I am here in Melbourne is located on Brunswick Street in Fitzroy. They have some seriously stunning fabrics, some of which are recycled, and a lot of them are actually dead stock from designer brands. The cargo pants that I'm making at the moment are using denim that I got from the fabric store, which is dead stock from Marc Jacobs, which is really cool. They're also big on sustainability. Again, not sponsored, I just think they're an amazing business and I love them. And last but not least, another favourite of mine is the Op Shop, aka the thrift store. This one requires a little more patience and persistence, but I like to think of it as a bit of an antidote to instant gratification, you know, just a little challenge. And a lot of the time it really pays off. Some of my absolute favourites are from the Op Shop. You can find some absolute gems this way, and being secondhand, this makes it the most sustainable option of them all. 4. Easy projects to start with. Before anything else, you obviously want to learn the basics of using a sewing machine, and there are so many videos and resources out there that can teach you. Once you feel confident sewing straight lines and basic stitches and feel comfortable operating your sewing machine, you can start searching for beginner-friendly sewing projects. Some great options are a simple tote bag, apron, even pajama shorts. I feel like pajama shorts is the go-to first sewing project. I know it was the first project they got us to do when I did textiles in high school, and I feel like it's the same case for so many people. I also have a video on my channel of 5 sewing projects for absolute beginners, which I will link somewhere here, which is a great one to get you started. It's definitely better to start small and work your way up to more complex projects, otherwise you could end up getting frustrated and just wanting to give up. If you're ever using a sewing pattern or following some instructions and you come across a term or technique that you're unsure about or you haven't heard before, it's definitely worth Googling it or finding a tutorial to walk you through it. As I said before, I've been sewing for more than 15 years and I still come across instructions that I'm not sure about from time to time. There's no shame in stopping and looking something up, and you're just adding more and more skills to your repertoire as you do so. Now finally, here's some bonus little tips and tricks to get you started. Go slow. Rushing doesn't get you anywhere and you're most likely going to end up regretting it. Going slowly and carefully is bound to pay off later and more likely to result in a garment that you're actually proud of and more likely to wear and use. Similar to the first one, take breaks and know when to call it a day. When I start getting tired and frustrated with a project, I've learned to call it quits and take a coffee or tea break, or even just call it a day and pick it up again the next day. I've learned this the hard way over many years, where pushing through has resulted in mistakes, sometimes irreparable ones, like overlocking through a part of fabric that you weren't supposed to. Knowing when to stop can save you a lot of heartache and resentment. Now this is kind of a niche one and maybe not that relatable, but I find that having a tag that I can add to my clothes for some reason makes me like them so much more. I think it sort of tricks my brain into thinking that they're bought pieces instead of handmade pieces, and it means I subconsciously reach for them more than I would otherwise. I ordered my tags from Etsy and I just sent them my logo and what I wanted printed on it, and it didn't even cost that much. A small investment for something that to me makes a lot of difference. Finally, start a list of sewing projects that you want to do and add to it as inspiration strikes. Like I was saying before, I started a Pinterest board of all the projects that I wanted to make, and I still add to it all the time. Instead of seeing something that I liked and then wanting to go and impulsively buy it, I trained myself to automatically make a note of it as something to make instead. And over time, it just became second nature. Now when I see something that I like, even just knowing that I could make it, oddly enough, satisfies the need to just run off and buy it. And that's all I've got. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if I've even inspired just one person to start making their own clothes, that's amazing. Would highly recommend giving it a go. You get so much out of it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, you know the drill. Remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more like this. Thanks for watching. Bye!